Tonight, we're going to explore a story that will completely change how you see Hanukkah forever. What if I told you that the Festival of Lights isn't really about a miracle of oil at all, but about something much darker, something that's been hidden for over 2,000 years? Brother fought against brother, families were torn apart, and blood flowed through the very temple courts where we celebrate today. The truth about Hanukkah is far more brutal than anyone ever told you. So settle in tonight, pull those covers up close, and let your mind drift as we journey back through time together. If you enjoy these gentle explorations of history's hidden truths, please subscribe to Sleepy Holidays, where we uncover the real stories behind our most cherished traditions. Take a deep breath, relax those shoulders, and prepare to discover what really happened during those 8 fateful nights so long ago. Chapter 1: The Untold Story of Hanukkah, Veiled Origins. Picture a warm living room tonight, families gathered around flickering candles, children's faces glowing in the amber light of the menorah. The smell of latkes fills the air. Parents tell the familiar story of brave Maccabees and oil that burned for 8 miraculous nights. It's a beautiful scene, peaceful, full of joy and tradition. But what if this gentle story is hiding something much more complex? The traditional tale we know is simple enough. Evil Greek King Antiochus defiled the temple, banned Jewish practices, and the heroic Maccabees rose up to save their faith. They cleansed the temple, found 1 day's worth of pure oil, yet miraculously it burned for 8 nights. A story of faith, triumph, and divine intervention. Sweet, inspiring, perfect for children. But history, as it often does, tells a very different story. Let's drift back to ancient Judea in the 2nd century before the Common Era. The land was not united, not peaceful, not simple. 2 very different groups of Jews lived side by side, but they might as well have been different peoples entirely. On one side, traditional Jews who clung to ancient ways, kept kosher, observed Sabbath, performed circumcision. On the other side, Hellenized Jews who embraced Greek culture. These Hellenized Jews built gymnasiums where they exercised naked in the Greek fashion. They studied Greek philosophy, adopted Greek names. Some even underwent painful procedures to reverse their circumcision, hiding their Jewish identity. To the traditional Jews, these weren't just cultural differences, they were betrayals of the covenant with God. Tensions simmered, resentment grew, and the stage was set for something terrible. When Antiochus Epiphanes took power, he didn't randomly decide to persecute Jews. He was invited, welcomed by the Hellenized Jewish elite in Jerusalem. They wanted his support, his protection, his approval for their Greek-influenced lifestyle. They helped him install Greek customs, participated in pagan rituals, and gradually the temple itself became a place where both Jewish and Greek practices mingled. Traditional Jews watched in horror and planned their response. The Maccabees weren't just fighting Greeks, they were fighting other Jews. Judah Maccabee and his brothers led raids not just against Syrian soldiers, but against Jewish villages that had embraced Hellenistic ways. They destroyed Greek-style schools, tore down gymnasiums, and forced Jewish men to be circumcised at sword point. What we call the Maccabean Revolt was really a civil war, with Jews killing Jews across the countryside. Imagine a village in ancient Judea, split right down the middle. On one side of the dusty street, families who spoke Greek at home sent their sons to the gymnasium, participated in Greek festivals. On the other side, families who whispered prayers in Hebrew, kept strict dietary laws, and viewed their neighbors as traitors to their ancestors. When the Maccabees arrived, neighbors would point across that street and seal their former friend's fate. The fundamentalist Maccabees hunted down Jews who had adopted Greek names, who had married non-Jewish wives, who had stopped observing the Sabbath. They moved through villages like a religious inquisition, demanding proof of faithfulness, executing those they deemed insufficient in their devotion. Ancient texts describe families fleeing in the night, children crying as their fathers were dragged away, communities torn apart by religious extremism versus cultural assimilation. The battles weren't just in open fields, they raged through temple courtyards, in family homes, in the very heart of Jewish communities. Blood stained the stones where children had played, where weddings had been celebrated, where both sides had once prayed to the same God. The Maccabees saw themselves as purifiers, saving Judaism from corruption. The Hellenized Jews saw them as fanatical murderers, destroying a beautiful fusion of cultures. When the Maccabees finally won, they didn't just cleanse the temple of Greek influences, they erased the memory of thousands of Jewish families who had chosen a different path. The victors wrote the history, and in their version, there were only heroes and villains, faithful Jews and evil Greeks. The complex reality, the Jewish victims of Jewish zealotry, the families destroyed by religious war, all of this was quietly forgotten. Even the ancient rabbis knew this story was too painful, too complicated, too morally ambiguous for simple celebration. For centuries, they avoided telling the full tale, focusing instead on the miracle of oil, the rededication of the temple, the triumph of faith over oppression. They transformed a bloody civil war into a gentle story of divine intervention. They knew some truths are too heavy for candlelit evenings, so when we light the menorah tonight, we're not just celebrating a miracle of oil that burned for 8 nights. We're commemorating the victory of one group of Jews over another group of Jews in a war that left families shattered, communities divided, and an entire way of life completely erased. The warm glow of those candles illuminates not just triumph, but also tragedy, loss, and the complicated nature of survival. The Hellenized Jews had their own children, their own dreams, their own understanding of what it meant to be part of God's chosen people. They believed they could be both Jewish and Greek, both faithful and cosmopolitan, both rooted in tradition and open to the wider world. Their vision died with them, in village squares, in temple courtyards, in the darkness between what was and what would be. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, remember that history is rarely as simple as our bedtime stories suggest. The light of those Hanukkah candles carries within it both celebration and sorrow, victory and loss, the complexity of human choices, and the weight of consequences that echo through time. Sometimes the most beautiful traditions grow from the most difficult truths, and that too is part of their sacred mystery. Chapter 2: Brutal Battlegrounds, Jerusalem Under Siege. The morning mist clings to Jerusalem's ancient stones, but something has changed. The streets that once echoed with unified prayers now whisper of division. Neighbor eyes neighbor with suspicion. Brother questions brother's loyalty. In the markets, voices drop to hushed conversations about gymnasium attendance, about who still follows the old ways. The sepia glow of dawn reveals a city slowly, painfully, tearing itself apart from within. Walk through these narrow alleyways, and you'll witness something heartbreaking. Families gathered around oil lamps, their faces etched with worry, sons arguing with fathers about Greek learning, daughters defending their right to participate in Hellenistic festivals. These aren't strangers debating politics. These are blood relatives, people who shared the same roof, the same meals, now finding themselves on opposite sides of an invisible battlefield that runs straight through their hearts. The traditionalists gather in shadowy corners, their beards long, their eyes fierce with conviction. They speak in whispers of preserving the ancient ways, of resisting the seductive pull of Greek culture. Meanwhile, in the newer districts, clean-shaven men discuss philosophy and athletics, their children learning Greek alongside Hebrew. Neither side realizes yet how deep this chasm will grow, how much blood will flow before either finds peace. Picture young Judah, barely 16, standing between his father and uncle. His father, weathered hands gripping a worn Torah scroll, demands loyalty to tradition. His uncle, educated in Greek schools, argues for progress and adaptation. Judah's heart pounds as he realizes there's no middle ground left. Every choice he makes, every word he speaks, will brand him as either faithful or traitor. The boy who once played freely now carries the weight of an entire culture's future. In the temple courtyards, where peaceful worship once reigned, tensions simmer like oil on a flame. Priests whisper urgently about maintaining ritual purity, while others quietly support cultural adaptation. The very stones seem to absorb this anxiety, this growing sense that something precious is slipping away. Ancient prayers echo differently now, carrying undertones of desperation, of a people grappling with their identity in a rapidly changing world that demands they choose sides. The Hellenized Jews, those who embraced Greek culture, never imagined they'd be called enemies by their own people. They attended symposiums, participated in athletic competitions, saw themselves as progressive members of their community. But now, walking through their own neighborhoods, they feel the cold stares, the whispered accusations of abandoning their heritage. Their Greek tunics, once symbols of worldliness, now mark them as targets for growing fundamentalist anger. Behind closed doors, wives plead with their husbands to avoid the growing militancy. Mothers clutch their children, knowing that boys barely old enough to hold swords are already choosing sides. In the women's quarters, quiet tears fall as families realize they're fracturing along ideological lines. These women, who've kept households together through famines and invasions, now face a different kind of destruction, one that attacks from within their own hearts and homes. The streets begin to empty at unusual hours, not from Roman curfews, but from fear of encountering the wrong neighbors. Market vendors notice customers asking careful questions before making purchases, trying to determine political loyalties before conducting business. Children who once played together across family lines now stay close to home, sensing the adult anxiety that permeates every conversation, every glance, every decision about where to walk and whom to trust. In the gymnasium, young Jewish men continue their athletic training, trying to ignore the growing hostility from traditional quarters. They oil their bodies, compete in wrestling, discuss Greek literature, all while knowing that each activity distances them further from their fundamentalist brothers. The marble floors echo with their footsteps, but also with the unspoken knowledge that their very presence here might soon be considered an act of betrayal, punishable by violence. The first clashes begin small, heated arguments in synagogues that escalate into pushing matches. Brothers who once shared wine at Sabbath dinner now refuse to eat together. Cousins cross the street to avoid uncomfortable conversations about loyalty and tradition. These micro conflicts, person by person, family by family, create an atmosphere where larger violence becomes inevitable. The city holds its breath, waiting for someone to strike the first decisive blow that will shatter all pretense of unity. When steel finally meets steel, it's not in some distant battlefield, but in the very heart of Jerusalem's residential quarters. Neighbor fights neighbor, using farming tools and kitchen knives as weapons. The cobblestones, worn smooth by generations of pilgrims, now run red with the blood of civil war. These aren't glorious battles between armies. These are desperate, tragic conflicts between people who once shared the same festivals, the same hopes, the same God. The sound of clashing metal rings through narrow alleyways, mixing with the cries of the wounded and the desperate pleas of those trying to stop the violence. Old men who survived foreign invasions now watch their own children fight to the death over questions of cultural identity. The irony cuts deeper than any blade that a people famous for surviving external threats should nearly destroy themselves from within over how faithful they must be to ancient ways. In hidden chambers, families gather to tend wounds and count losses. A father mourns his Hellenized son, while across the city, another father grieves for his traditionally minded brother. The division runs so deep that even in death, the fallen cannot be buried together. Separate cemeteries, separate mourning rituals, separate everything in a community that once prided itself on unity. The cost of ideological purity becomes clear, measured in broken families and empty houses. Children huddle in basements, listening to the sounds of battle overhead, not understanding why Uncle Simon fights against Cousin David. Their innocent questions receive no satisfactory answers because there are none. How do you explain to a child that people who love the same traditions, worship the same God, can hate each other enough to kill, over different interpretations of faithfulness, over different responses to foreign cultural pressure, over different definitions of what it means to be truly Jewish? As night falls over the besieged city, Jerusalem resembles a wounded animal, bleeding from self-inflicted wounds. The traditional quarter burns, sending smoke signals of ideological warfare. The Hellenistic district barricades its streets, preparing for another dawn of violence. In between, in the neutral spaces that grow smaller each day, ordinary people pray for an end to madness, wondering how celebration of faith became justification for fratricide, how religious devotion birthed such devastating division. The chapter closes with Jerusalem holding its breath, waiting for resolution that seems impossible. Brothers lie dead, families destroyed, neighborhoods in ruins, all in the name of preserving or progressing tradition. The Maccabees sharpen their swords, the Hellenized Jews count their losses, and somewhere between these extremes, the ordinary people, those who simply wanted to live peacefully with their faith, find themselves forced to choose sides in a war nobody really wanted to fight. Tomorrow will bring new battles, new bloodshed, new reasons to question whether victory is worth such a terrible price. Chapter 3: Flames of Faith, the Maccabean Revolt. In the shadows of Jerusalem's ancient stones, a different kind of fire began to burn, not the gentle flames of temple oil, but the fierce blaze of religious fury. The Maccabees emerged from obscurity like avenging spirits, their hearts hardened against compromise. They watched their fellow Jews embrace Greek customs, build gymnasiums, abandon sacred traditions, and in that watching, something dark and zealous awakened. A revolution was coming, brother against brother. Mattathias, the priest, stood in his village square, torch flames dancing across his weathered face. Before him lay the altar of Zeus, erected by Greek soldiers. The smell of foreign incense filled the air, polluting sacred ground. His own neighbors had gathered to watch, some eager to appease their occupiers. When a fellow Jew stepped forward to make the sacrifice, Mattathias felt something snap inside his chest. His hand moved to his blade, and history pivoted on that single moment of rage. Blood spilled quickly that day, staining the village stones crimson. Mattathias struck down both the collaborator and the Greek official, his sons rushing to his side. The die was cast now. There could be no turning back. They fled to the hills like hunted animals, but they were no longer alone. Other fundamentalists joined them, men who refused to bend the knee. In caves and wilderness hideouts, they sharpened their swords and nursed their fury, planning their holy war. Judah Maccabeus took command when his father died, earning his name through brutal efficiency. The Hammer, they called him. His forces grew from dozens to hundreds, then thousands. But these weren't just battles against foreign soldiers. They were hunting expeditions against their own people. Jewish families who had embraced Greek ways, who sent their children to gymnasiums, who had stopped circumcising their sons. The Maccabees showed them no mercy, for compromise was apostasy. In flickering torchlight, they raided village after village. Hellenized Jews fled before them like shadows, abandoning homes their families had known for generations. The Maccabees burned Greek books, destroyed gymnasiums, forcibly circumcised children whose parents had chosen assimilation. They believed they were saving souls, but the screams of the innocent echoed through the night. Religious purity demanded a price, and that price was paid in tears and blood and broken families. The temple courtyards became a battleground, brother fighting brother beneath sacred walls. Greek soldiers tried to maintain order, but found themselves caught between two warring Jewish factions. On one side, the traditionalists who refused to compromise. On the other, the modernizers who saw Greek culture as progress. Both claimed to fight for Jerusalem, both shed blood on holy ground. Both believed God favored their cause over the other. Victory came slowly, brutally, through guerrilla warfare in narrow mountain passes. The Maccabees knew every cave, every hidden trail, every secret water source. They struck at dawn and melted away by noon, leaving behind burning settlements and weeping widows. Their enemies called them terrorists. Their supporters called them freedom fighters. The truth, whispered in the darkness, was that they were both. Liberation and oppression often wear the same face. When Jerusalem finally fell to their forces, the Maccabees found the temple defiled beyond recognition. Zeus statues stood where the ark once rested. Pig blood stained the altar stones. Greek inscriptions covered sacred walls. Judah wept as he walked through the devastation, but his tears quickly turned to rage. They would cleanse this place, restore its purity, make it worthy of their God again. The rededication would take 8 days and become legend. But even in victory, shadows lingered in the corners of triumph. The oil that burned for 8 days was indeed miraculous, yet it illuminated the faces of the defeated as well as the victorious. Jewish families who had chosen different paths, who had seen beauty in Greek philosophy, who had tried to build bridges between cultures, they too were children of Abraham. Their silence now spoke louder than any celebration, a haunting reminder of paths not taken. The Maccabean kingdom that emerged was built on foundations of religious extremism, a state where purity was enforced through violence. They had won their war, but at what cost? Villages lay empty, families scattered to distant lands, ancient traditions of debate and questioning, silenced by the sword. The fundamentalists had saved Judaism from Hellenization, but they had also transformed it into something harder, more rigid, less forgiving of difference. In the amber glow of temple flames, we see the uncomfortable truth that history often buries. The Maccabees were not simply freedom fighters resisting oppression, they were religious zealots who used violence to enforce conformity. Their enemy wasn't just Greek occupation, but Jewish diversity itself. They saved the faith by nearly destroying it, preserved tradition by eliminating the voices that questioned it, won independence by fracturing their own people. The ancient rabbis who came after understood this complexity, which is why early Talmudic sources barely mention the Maccabees at all. They preferred to focus on the miracle of oil, the rededication of the temple, the triumph of light over darkness. It was easier to celebrate divine intervention than to examine the human cost of religious revolution. Some truths are too heavy for holiday songs, too complex for simple celebrations. As we trace the flickering shadows across ancient walls, we must ask ourselves difficult questions. When does faith become fanaticism? When does preservation become destruction? When does the desire for purity poison the very thing it seeks to protect? The Maccabees believed they were saving Judaism, but their methods created wounds that would never fully heal, divisions that echo even today across the centuries, scars hidden beneath the warmth of festival lights. The torches that guided the Maccabees through their holy war cast long shadows, shadows that reached far beyond their own time. They established a precedent that would haunt Jewish history, the idea that violence could be sanctified, that extremism could be justified, that the ends could sanctify any means. Their flames of faith burned bright, but they also consumed the voices of moderation, the possibilities for coexistence, the dream of synthesis. So when we light the Hanukkah candles each December night, perhaps we should remember not just the miracle, but the tragedy that made it necessary. Not just the victory, but the defeated. Not just the rededication, but the devastation that preceded it. The Festival of Lights carries within it the memory of a civil war, a reminder that sometimes winning means losing something precious, something that can never quite be recovered. As the final flames flicker and fade into memory, we're left with questions that have no easy answers. The Maccabees saved Judaism from disappearing entirely, but they also changed it forever. They preserved the faith, but at the cost of its complexity. They lit the eternal flame, but in doing so, they extinguished other lights that might have burned just as bright, casting shadows that still dance across our understanding today, whispering uncomfortable truths in the darkness. Chapter 4: Searing Losses, the Fractured Jewish Community. Now we must speak of the wounds that cut deepest, the divisions that tore through families like lightning splits ancient trees. For this was not simply Greeks against Jews, but Jew against Jew, brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. In the quiet shadows of Judean villages, the most painful battles were just beginning to unfold across kitchen tables and synagogue steps. Picture the morning when Sarah could no longer speak to her sister, when Abraham turned away from his eldest son, when childhood friends became strangers overnight. The gymnasium had become more than a building, it was a symbol, a line drawn in the sand. Those who exercised there, who adopted Greek names, who dressed in Greek fashion, found themselves marked, labeled, whispered about in the marketplace shadows. The Hellenized Jews had not meant to betray anyone. They saw beauty in Greek philosophy, wisdom in their sciences, freedom in their arts. They believed they could honor their ancestors while embracing new ways of thinking, but to the Maccabees, this was compromise, this was surrender, This was the slow death of everything sacred. And so the hunting began, quiet at first, then growing louder. In the olive groves outside Jerusalem, families met in secret, whispering in hushed tones about relatives who had disappeared, about friends who no longer answered their doors. The Maccabees moved through neighborhoods like shadows, questioning, investigating, determining who was truly faithful and who had fallen to foreign ways. Trust became a luxury no one could afford. Suspicion poisoned every conversation. Young Joshua had learned to speak perfect Greek, had studied their mathematics, had even taken a Greek name, Alexander. His father wept when the Maccabees came asking questions. Joshua fled in the night, leaving behind everything he had ever known. His mother never saw him again, but she heard whispers, rumors of Hellenized Jews hiding in distant cities, living as strangers in their own land. The Torah scholars who had debated Greek philosophy found their scrolls burned, their schools closed, their students scattered like leaves in autumn wind. These were not evil men, they were seekers of knowledge, builders of bridges between worlds. But bridges become targets in times of war, and knowledge itself can be seen as betrayal when fear rules the heart of a community. Listen carefully to this, for it echoes through centuries. The Maccabees truly believed they were saving their people, preserving their faith, protecting their children from corruption. But salvation often comes with a price, and that price was paid by Jewish families who simply saw the world differently, who imagined a future where old wisdom and new learning could dance together under the same stars. In the markets of Judea, silence fell, where laughter once echoed. Merchants who had traded with Greeks, who had learned their language, who had adopted their business practices, found their stalls empty, their goods unwanted. Children who had played Greek games, who had worn Greek clothing, suddenly found themselves alone in schoolyards, their playmates warned away by fearful parents. The tragedy was not in the differences themselves, but in the inability to hold space for both paths. The community that had survived exile in Babylon, that had rebuilt the temple stone by stone, that had weathered countless storms, now fractured along invisible lines of belief and practice. Each side claimed to love Israel, yet Israel herself was bleeding from these internal wounds. Picture Rebecca, standing in her doorway, watching her son march away with the Maccabees, while her husband hid his Greek books beneath loose floorboards. She loved them both, understood both their hearts, but could not heal the chasm growing between them. In homes across Judea, mothers became peacemakers in wars that could not be won, only endured, with quiet dignity and endless tears. The gymnasium became a ghost, its columns standing empty, its training grounds silent. Once it had been filled with Jewish youth learning, growing, laughing together. Now it stood as a monument to dreams deferred, to friendships broken, to a path not taken. The echoes of footsteps and conversation faded into memory, replaced by the whispered prayers of those who mourned what might have been. Some families simply disappeared, slipping away in the dark hours before dawn, carrying only what they could hold. They left behind houses, businesses, graves of their ancestors. In distant lands, they would rebuild their lives, but they would carry forever the weight of exile, not from foreign oppressors, but from their own people, their own community, their own understanding of what it meant to be chosen. The scrolls tell us of victory, but they do not record the names of the defeated. They speak of purification, but not of the pure hearts that were broken. They celebrate the rededication of the temple, but cannot restore the families torn asunder in its name. History, as always, is written by those who remain, while the voices of the displaced fade into whispered memories and unfinished prayers. In years to come, rabbis would struggle with this legacy. How do you celebrate liberation when liberation required the silencing of your own people? How do you light candles of joy when they illuminate the shadows of exile? How do you tell children about miracles when some miracles demand that others disappear? These questions echo still in the spaces between the flames, in the pauses between prayers. The Hellenized Jews were not villains in this story. They were dreamers who imagined a bigger world, scholars who saw wisdom wherever it grew, parents who wanted their children to have every opportunity. Their crime was loving too broadly, trusting too deeply, believing that faith could expand without breaking. History would judge them harshly, but the stars above Judea remember their gentle hearts and generous spirits. And so we close this painful chapter, not with triumph, but with the recognition that even our most sacred victories carry within them the seeds of loss, the light we kindle, the prayers we whisper, the stories we tell. They honor not just the victors, but all who loved in their own way, all who sought truth on different paths, all whose absence makes our celebrations bittersweet and beautifully human. Chapter 5. Blood-Soaked Triumph. The Maccabees' Ascendance. The temple courtyards are quiet now, but the stones still remember. Blood has been spilled here, brother against brother, faith against faith. The Maccabees stand victorious, but victory tastes different when it comes at such a cost. Tonight, we walk through these sacred halls where triumph and tragedy dance together in the flickering shadows, where power was seized and legends were born from the ashes of civil war. Picture these temple courtyards, no longer echoing with Greek hymns or the laughter of Hellenized Jews. The Maccabees have claimed this sacred space, their sandals treading where their enemies once walked freely. The architecture remains the same, but everything has changed. These walls have witnessed the brutal calculus of religious war, where faith became a weapon and salvation came wrapped in the cloth of conquest. The very air seems heavy with the weight of transformation. Victory brings its own urgent demands, and the Maccabees know this all too well. They cannot simply celebrate, they must consolidate. Power seized in battle must consolidate. Power seized in battle must be cemented in peace, or it will crumble like sand through desperate fingers. Every day that passes without legitimacy is a day their enemies might regroup. The temple conquest was just the beginning. Now comes the harder task, transforming military success into lasting authority that future generations will accept as righteous. How do you legitimize conquest, especially when your victims were your own people? The Maccabees face a delicate challenge. They must paint their civil war as a holy crusade. The Hellenized Jews they defeated cannot simply be forgotten. They must be recast, transformed in memory from neighbors and relatives into enemies of the faith itself. History must be reshaped, carved like clay in gentle hands, until the blood on their swords becomes the righteousness of divine justice. The temple's rededication becomes their masterpiece, a brilliant stroke of political theater disguised as religious revival. Watch how they transform this moment from the aftermath of brutal conquest into something sacred and pure. The oil that miraculously burns for 8 days becomes more than a symbol of divine favor. It becomes proof that their cause was righteous, that the bloodshed was necessary, that God Himself blessed their violent ascension to power through unmistakable miracle. This dedication ceremony serves dual purposes, interweaving religious revival with political authority in ways that cannot be untangled. The priests who light the sacred flames also crown new rulers. The prayers that consecrate the temple also legitimize the regime. Every ritual word, every ceremonial gesture declares not just that this space belongs to God, but that these particular men, these blood-stained victors, are his chosen instruments on earth. Sacred and secular merge completely, and so Hanukkah begins to take shape, not as ancient tradition, but as fresh propaganda wrapped in the warm glow of divine miracle. The Maccabees understand story's power, how narrative can transform raw conquest into sacred legend. The oil that burns for 8 days becomes more compelling than the blood that flowed for 8 months. The temple's rededication overshadows the devastation of divided communities. Miracle eclipses massacre, and a holiday is born from the ashes of civil war. Listen, can you hear them? The hallowed whispers echoing through these ancient corridors, prayers offered in grateful thanksgiving, but also in desperate justification. The flickering candlelight casts long shadows, hiding as much as it reveals. These flames that burn so purely illuminate faces marked by both triumph and trauma. In this sacred space, reflection becomes unavoidable, even for those who would prefer to forget the true cost of their victory. Power dynamics shift like shadows in this candlelit temple, and we must examine them honestly, even when honesty feels uncomfortable. The Maccabees who once hid in caves now sit in halls of authority. The Hellenized Jews who once walked freely here are either dead, converted, or fled. This reversal of fortune, this complete transformation of social order, happened through violence, through the systematic elimination of those who chose a different path of Jewish identity. Moral ambiguity hangs heavy in this incense-perfumed air because conquest is never clean, never simple, never purely righteous. The Maccabees fought for their vision of Judaism, but in doing so, they destroyed other visions, other Jews, other ways of being faithful. Can a cause be just if it requires the elimination of those who disagree? Can a victory be holy when it's built on the graves of your own people? These questions haunt the shadows. This complicated legacy sets the stage for how the Hanukkah story will be retold across centuries. The raw truth of civil war will be softened into tales of resistance against foreign oppression. The moral complexity will be simplified into clear battles between good and evil. The blood of Jewish brothers will be forgotten in favor of miraculous oil. History will be polished until it shines with the warm glow of righteousness, hiding the darkness beneath. But tonight, in this quiet moment of reflection, we can acknowledge the full complexity of victory. The Maccabees did preserve a form of Judaism, but at the cost of destroying others. They did restore the temple, but through violence that tore communities apart. Their triumph was real, their dedication sincere, and their legacy forever complicated by the means they chose to secure their ends. Victory and tragedy intertwined like the smoke from their sacred flames. The irony is profound, and perhaps intentional. Blood and sanctification, violence and holiness, conquest and consecration, all flowing together in these temple courts. The same hands that wielded swords now light sacred flames. The same voices that shouted battle cries now whisper prayers of thanksgiving. The Maccabees transformed themselves from warriors to priests, from conquerors to guardians, through ritual that both remembers and erases their violent ascent to power. Political necessity shapes religious narrative, as it always has, as it always will. The Maccabees need their story to inspire, not to horrify. They need their legacy to unite, not to divide. So the uncomfortable truths, the moral ambiguities, the tragic costs, All these must be carefully managed, transformed through the alchemy of time, and telling until raw history becomes polished legend, until civil war becomes holy crusade, until conquest becomes miracle. The uncomfortable truth of triumph lingers in these shadows like incense smoke, visible but ephemeral, present but easily ignored. The Maccabees have won, but winning required becoming something they might not have chosen to be. Their ascendance is complete, but ascendance always demands sacrifice, not just from the defeated, but from the victors themselves, who must live forever with the knowledge of what their victory truly cost and who paid the price. And so we prepare to witness how this blood-soaked triumph will be transformed through the gentle alchemy of time and telling into the warm glow of Hanukkah legend. The harsh edges will be smoothed, the moral complexities simplified, the Civil War reimagined as resistance to foreign tyranny. Watch now as history becomes holiday, as conquest becomes celebration, as the Maccabees' ascendance morphs into a story parents tell children around flickering candles on winter nights. Chapter 6: Shadows of the Past, Echoes of Forgotten Histories. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we choose not to tell, the memories we deliberately let fade into darkness. Tonight, we explore a profound question. Why did the brutal civil war at Hanukkah's heart vanish from Jewish memory? What forces shaped this selective amnesia, and what does it reveal about how we construct our most sacred narratives? Let's uncover the intentional forgetting that reshaped history itself. In the centuries following the Maccabean revolt, ancient Jewish scholars faced an uncomfortable dilemma. How do you celebrate a victory when that victory came at such a terrible cost? The civil war between traditional and Hellenized Jews had torn families apart, turned synagogues into battlegrounds, made brothers into enemies. The triumph they inherited was stained with the blood of fellow Jews, and this created a profound theological crisis that demanded resolution. Picture the great academies of learning in ancient Judea, where wise rabbis gathered by flickering oil lamps to debate the meaning of their history. They understood something profound about memory, that what we choose to remember shapes who we become. The brutal details of brother fighting brother, of families destroyed by religious zealotry, these stories served no purpose in building a unified people, so they began the delicate work of selective remembrance. The process was subtle, almost imperceptible. In their teachings, the scholars began emphasizing the miracle of oil lasting 8 days rather than the rivers of blood that flowed for 8 years. They spoke of divine intervention rather than human violence. They crafted narratives of unity against foreign oppression, while quietly letting the stories of internal conflict fade like smoke from extinguished candles. This wasn't deception, it was deliberate construction of hope. Ancient texts reveal this transformation happening in real time. Early chronicles speak openly of the civil war, of Jewish communities split down the middle, of the terrible choices families faced between tradition and modernity. But as centuries passed, these details grew dimmer in the retellings. Later texts focus almost exclusively on the battle against Antiochus, painting the conflict as purely external, a unified people against foreign tyranny, rather than a fractured nation at war with itself. Consider the psychological necessity of this forgetting. A people who had endured exile, persecution, the destruction of their temple, they needed stories that bound them together, not tales that highlighted their capacity for internal division. The rabbis understood that survival sometimes requires editing the past, crafting memories that serve the future rather than simply preserving what actually happened. They were architects of collective healing through selective amnesia. But this forgetting came at a cost. The Hellenized Jews who died defending their vision of Jewish life, their stories vanished almost entirely. The families who chose Greek culture and paid with their lives, they became nameless shadows in history. The complexity of their choices, the validity of their different path, all of this was sacrificed on the altar of communal unity. Their voices were silenced by the need for a simpler, more comforting narrative. Imagine sitting in those ancient study halls, scrolls spread across wooden tables, scholars debating not just what happened, but what should be remembered. They grappled with questions that still echo today. How do we honor the dead without glorifying violence? How do we build identity without demonizing the other? How do we create sacred stories from profane events? Their answers shaped not just Jewish memory, but the very nature of Hanukkah itself. The transformation was so complete that by the medieval period, most Jews had no knowledge of the Civil War at all. Hanukkah had become purely a story of religious freedom, of small lights pushing back great darkness, of divine miracles in times of despair. The festival of dedication became exactly that, a rededication to hope rather than a commemoration of conquest. The brutal origins were buried beneath layers of beautiful meaning. This selective memory wasn't unique to Jewish culture. It's how all societies construct their foundational stories. Every nation, every people, every family does this to some degree. We emphasize the noble moments and let the troubling details fade. We craft legends that inspire rather than histories that complicate. The rabbis were simply doing what humans have always done, choosing which memories serve life and which serve only pain. Yet something profound was lost in this process. The Hellenized Jews weren't villains. They were people trying to survive in a changing world, adapting their ancient faith to new realities. Their gymnasiums weren't temples of corruption. They were attempts to bridge cultures, to find ways to be both Jewish and part of the larger Mediterranean world. Their story deserved to be remembered too, but collective memory chose differently. Modern historians have worked to uncover these buried narratives, piecing together fragments from archaeological digs, analyzing ancient texts with fresh eyes, listening for the silenced voices. They've revealed the full complexity of that ancient conflict, showing us that the Maccabean revolt was far messier, far more morally ambiguous than the simple story we inherited. Truth, it seems, is always more complicated than the myths we build from it. This raises uncomfortable questions about our own time. What stories are we choosing to remember? Which voices are we allowing to fade? How do we balance the need for unity with the obligation to truth? The ancient rabbis made their choices based on the needs of their moment, but we live in different times with different challenges, perhaps requiring different kinds of memory and different kinds of courage. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, consider the weight of memory, how the stories we tell shape the people we become. The rabbis who crafted the Hanukkah narrative weren't trying to deceive, they were trying to heal. They understood that sometimes forgetting is an act of love, a way of choosing hope over despair, light over darkness, unity over division. Their selective amnesia was a form of collective compassion. But perhaps true wisdom lies in holding both truths, acknowledging the complexity while still celebrating the light. We can honor the miracle of oil lasting 8 days while also remembering the human cost of those 8 years of war. We can celebrate religious freedom while mourning those who died for choosing a different path. Memory doesn't have to be simple to be sacred, it just has to be honest about its own limitations. As we close this chapter on forgotten histories, let the gentle flicker of candlelight remind you that every flame casts shadows. In those shadows live the stories we've chosen not to tell, the voices we've allowed to fade, the complexity we've traded for comfort. Tomorrow we'll explore how these buried truths still echo in our modern celebrations, shaping our festivals in ways we rarely recognize. But for now, rest in the mystery of memory itself. Chapter 7: An Uncomfortable Echo, the Hellenistic Legacy. Tonight, we open a door that history tried to seal shut. We step into the shadows where archaeological truth meets uncomfortable reality, where the very culture the Maccabees fought to destroy continued to flourish in Jewish communities for centuries. The whispers of ancient stones tell a different story, one that challenges everything we thought we knew about cultural victory and defeat. Beneath the dust of forgotten excavations, archaeologists uncover gymnasium foundations in Jewish quarters, long after the Maccabean triumph. These aren't Greek invaders' buildings, but Jewish constructions built by Jewish hands, funded by Jewish families who never stopped embracing Hellenistic ideals. The stones speak of a resistance that wasn't quite resistance, of a victory that wasn't quite victory. The echo grew louder with each discovery. In Jerusalem's ancient neighborhoods, excavators find ritual baths built in Greek architectural style, Jewish stars carved alongside Greek symbols, Hebrew inscriptions using Greek lettering techniques. These aren't accidents of history, but deliberate choices made by generations who saw no contradiction between faith and culture. The Maccabees had won the war, but the cultural battle continued in whispers, in hidden choices, in compromises. The uncomfortable truth emerges from ancient medical texts. Jewish physicians continued Greek medical practices. Jewish scholars preserved Greek philosophical works. Jewish merchants adopted Greek business methods. They weren't betraying their heritage, they were expanding it, blending it, creating something new. The Maccabees fought for purity, but their descendants chose complexity. The echo of Hellenism grew into a symphony, playing in Jewish homes for generations. Archaeological evidence reveals Jewish families who quietly resumed Greek educational practices, teaching their children Greek literature alongside Torah, Greek mathematics alongside Hebrew prayers. They weren't rejecting Judaism, but refusing to reject knowledge. In private courtyards, away from zealous eyes, the intellectual traditions the Maccabees condemned continued to flourish. The war had ended, but the ideas lived on, stronger than sword or flame. In Judean villages, archaeologists discover amphitheaters, built generations after the revolt, designed by Jewish architects, attended by Jewish audiences. These communities weren't abandoning their faith, but expanding their cultural expression. They attended morning prayers, then evening performances, seeing no contradiction between devotion and drama. The Maccabees had fought for one vision of Judaism, but history embraced multiple visions, multiple paths, multiple truths. The theoretical framework becomes clear. Cultural influence operates like water, flowing around obstacles, seeping through barriers, finding new channels when old ones close. The Maccabean victory blocked one river, but thousands of streams continued flowing, carrying Greek ideas into Jewish minds, Greek beauty into Jewish art, Greek logic into Jewish thought. Resistance, it turns out, isn't always resistance. Sometimes it's just delay. Ancient Jewish texts, written centuries after the revolt, reveal authors quoting Greek philosophers, using Greek rhetorical techniques, applying Greek analytical methods to Hebrew scriptures. These weren't acts of rebellion, but acts of integration, of synthesis, of cultural evolution. The Maccabees fought to preserve tradition, but their intellectual descendants preserved tradition by adapting it, strengthening it, allowing it to grow beyond its original boundaries. Excavations in ancient synagogues reveal Greek architectural elements integrated seamlessly with Jewish religious requirements, Greek decorative motifs surrounding Hebrew sacred texts, Greek mathematical proportions governing Hebrew sacred spaces. These buildings weren't compromises, but achievements proving that cultural borrowing could strengthen rather than weaken. That tradition could absorb outside influences and become more traditional, more itself, more enduring than before. The uncomfortable realization settles like evening mist. The Maccabees fought a war against cultural change, but change, like time itself, proves unstoppable. Their victory preserved Jewish independence, but couldn't preserve Jewish isolation. The very communities they died to protect eventually chose the cultural paths they died fighting. It wasn't betrayal, it was growth, evolution, the natural progression of a living culture encountering, absorbing, transforming outside influences. Archaeological layers tell the story. Pre-revolt Jewish pottery shows minimal Greek influence. Post-revolt pottery reveals extensive Greek techniques, Greek patterns, Greek aesthetic sensibilities, but applied to Jewish religious and domestic needs. The artisans weren't rejecting their Maccabean heritage, but building upon it, creating something richer, more complex, more beautiful than either pure Jewish or pure Greek traditions could have produced alone. In private letters, preserved by desert sands, Jewish families discuss Greek tutors for their children, Greek literature for their libraries, Greek architectural plans for their homes. They write in Hebrew about Greek subjects, expressing Jewish values through Greek intellectual frameworks. These families honored the Maccabee memory while quietly embracing what the Maccabees opposed. The echo had become a harmony, multiple voices singing different parts of the same song. The theoretical implications ripple outward. If culture flows like water, then every attempt to dam it simply creates new channels, new directions, new expressions. The Maccabees succeeded in their immediate goal, expelling Greek political control, but the deeper Greek cultural influence proved more persistent, more adaptable, more appealing than anyone anticipated. Victory in war doesn't guarantee victory in the longer contest of ideas, aesthetics, ways of seeing the world. Ancient Jewish coins, minted decades after the revolt, bear Greek inscriptions, use Greek monetary systems, display Greek artistic conventions, while commemorating Jewish religious themes. The contradiction seems obvious until you realize there is no contradiction. These communities weren't confused, but confident, confident that Jewish identity could embrace, absorb, transform anything useful, anything beautiful, anything true, regardless of its origin. Cultural strength, they discovered, comes through integration, not isolation. The whispered truth emerges from shadows. The Maccabean legacy wasn't cultural purity, but cultural confidence, the courage to remain Jewish while engaging the wider world, the wisdom to preserve essential traditions while allowing non-essential practices to evolve. The uncomfortable echo of Hellenism wasn't the sound of defeat, but the sound of maturity, of a culture strong enough to borrow, adapt, and remain itself through every transformation. As this chapter closes, we carry forward this uncomfortable realization. The story of Hanukkah isn't just about military victory, but about the ongoing negotiation between tradition and change, purity and adaptation, isolation and engagement. The Maccabees won their war, but their descendants faced harder questions, more complex choices, more nuanced paths. The echo continues, reverberating through centuries, shaping the festival we know and the meanings we still discover. Chapter 8: Recasting the Narrative. Birth of a Miracle. The ancient rabbis faced a delicate problem: how to transform a story of brutal civil war into something families could celebrate together peacefully. The Maccabean revolt had left deep wounds, brother against brother, village against village. Yet from this darkness, they would craft something truly beautiful, a narrative shift so masterful that centuries later we would remember only flickering flames and sacred oil. The blood would fade, but the light would endure forever. Picture the wise rabbis gathering in dimly lit study halls, scrolls scattered across wooden tables, candlelight dancing on weathered faces. They understood something profound about human nature. People need hope more than harsh truths. The Maccabean story was real, raw, devastating, but it was also dangerous. How could they honor the past while protecting future generations from its divisive legacy? The answer lay in shifting focus from the warriors to the oil, from conquest to miracle, from bloodshed to divine blessing. The transformation wasn't sudden, it unfolded gradually across generations. Storytellers began emphasizing different details, the temple's rededication rather than the battles that preceded it. The oil that burned for 8 days became the centerpiece, pushing aside memories of the families torn apart by religious extremism. This wasn't deception, it was compassionate curation. The rabbis recognized that some truths, however historically accurate, could poison the wells of community harmony for centuries to come. Wisdom sometimes means knowing what to remember and what to gently forget. Imagine congregations gathered on winter nights, children's eyes wide with wonder as elders spoke of miracles instead of massacres. The storytellers painted vivid scenes, priests discovering that single vial of pure oil in the temple ruins. They described the impossible, one day's supply, burning for 8, flame dancing defiantly against the darkness. This version offered something the original could not: unity instead of division, celebration instead of sorrow, divine intervention instead of human brutality. The miracle narrative wrapped around hearts like warm light around cold stone. The strategic brilliance of this shift cannot be overstated. It preserved the essence of resistance while discarding the poison of civil conflict. Hanukkah could now celebrate religious freedom without glorifying religious violence, honor Jewish identity without condemning Jewish diversity. The oil miracle created space for all Jews, those who embraced tradition and those who adapted to changing times. It was a master class in narrative healing, transforming a wound into a wonder, a division into a celebration that could unite rather than divide communities. Consider the profound psychology at work here. The rabbis understood that trauma, left untreated, perpetuates itself across generations. The original Hanukkah story carried the seeds of future conflicts, the notion that true Jews must wage war against fellow Jews who think differently. By emphasizing the miracle over the militancy, they created a healing narrative. The light became a symbol of hope, the oil a metaphor for faith's endurance, the 8 nights a celebration of persistence rather than a commemoration of bloodshed. Picture the ancient world where this transformation took place. Communities scattered across the Mediterranean, each carrying fragments of collective memory. Some remembered the political victories, others the religious revelations, still others the family tragedies. The rabbis faced the challenge of creating coherence from chaos, unity from fragmentation. The miracle narrative provided that coherence, a single, simple story that could be told anywhere, to anyone, without reopening old wounds or creating new divisions. It was narrative alchemy at its finest, transforming lead into gold. The genius lay not in what they added, but in what they chose to leave behind. Gone were the detailed accounts of Hellenized Jews fleeing their homes. Erased were the descriptions of fundamentalist violence in village squares. Forgotten were the names of Jewish families who chose cultural integration over religious isolation. Instead, the story became about light conquering darkness, about faith rewarded with divine intervention, about hope persisting against impossible odds. The editing was surgical, precise, and ultimately merciful to future generations, seeking inspiration rather than division. Visualize the ripple effects across centuries, children learning to associate Hanukkah with warmth, family, and wonder rather than war, judgment, and exclusion. The miracle narrative created space for celebration without shame, for Jewish identity without fundamentalism, for religious commitment without religious supremacy. This wasn't historical revisionism, it was therapeutic storytelling. The rabbis recognized that communities, like individuals, sometimes need healing narratives more than literal truths, stories that bind wounds rather than reopen them, that inspire hope rather than perpetuate hatred. The transformation reveals something beautiful about human resilience, our capacity to find light in the darkest chapters of our past. The Maccabean revolt had been a nightmare of brother against brother, but from that nightmare emerged a dream of divine providence and enduring faith. The oil miracle became a bridge, connecting ancient trauma to modern hope, linking historical reality to spiritual possibility. It allowed Jews to honor their ancestors' courage without inheriting their conflicts, to celebrate survival without celebrating the methods that enabled it. Consider how this narrative shift changed the very meaning of victory, no longer about defeating enemies, but about faith enduring against overwhelming odds, no longer about purifying the community through violence, but about purifying the temple through divine intervention. The 8 nights became 8 opportunities for gratitude rather than 8 reminders of bloodshed. This reframing transformed Hanukkah from a potentially divisive commemoration into a unifying celebration, one that could inspire rather than intimidate, heal rather than harm, unite rather than fragment Jewish communities across time and geography. Picture congregations centuries later, families gathering around flickering candles, children asking about the miracle of oil, parents sharing stories of faith and perseverance. The violent origins had been so thoroughly transformed that few even remembered them. The strategy had worked. Hanukkah became a celebration of light rather than a commemoration of conflict, a festival of hope rather than a memorial to hatred. The ancient rabbis had succeeded in their compassionate conspiracy, creating a holiday that healed rather than harmed, that united rather than divided future generations. Yet this transformation came with a cost, the erasure of inconvenient truths about Jewish diversity and the dangers of fundamentalism. The Hellenized Jews who built gymnasiums and embraced Greek culture simply vanished from the story, their perspectives silenced, their experiences invalidated. The narrative of miraculous oil obscured the reality of religious violence, making it harder for future generations to recognize and resist similar patterns. The rabbi's healing narrative, while merciful, also created blind spots, areas where communities might repeat historical mistakes without recognizing the warning signs. The philosophical implications ripple through time, raising questions about the relationship between truth and healing, between history and hope. When does therapeutic storytelling become dangerous mythology? When does compassionate editing become harmful erasure? When does the protection of future generations require the honoring of past complexity? The rabbis made their choice, prioritizing community harmony over historical accuracy, choosing inspiration over information, selecting unity over uncomfortable truths. Their decision shaped not just how we celebrate Hanukkah, but how we understand the very nature of collective memory and narrative healing. As we light our own candles today, we participate in this ancient transformation without even realizing it. Each flame carries the weight of countless editorial decisions. Each blessing reflects centuries of careful narrative curation. Each celebration embodies the rabbi's choice to emphasize miracle over militancy. We are the inheritors of their compassionate conspiracy, recipients of their healing narrative, beneficiaries of their decision to transform trauma into wonder. The light we see is not just oil burning, but hope persisting, not just fire flickering, but faith enduring across impossible odds. The miracle of Hanukkah, then, is not just about oil lasting 8 days. It is about human wisdom transforming historical trauma into contemporary hope, about storytellers choosing healing over harm, about communities prioritizing unity over uncomfortable truths. The ancient rabbis performed their own miracle, turning a story of division into a celebration of light, transforming a narrative of religious violence into a festival of faith and family. As we prepare to explore deeper symbolism and tradition, we carry with us this understanding of how carefully, how lovingly, how wisely our ancestors crafted the stories that shape us. Chapter 9: Flickers of Hope, Symbols and Tradition. As we settle deeper into our exploration, the gentle glow of candlelight reveals something profound. These aren't just flames dancing in the darkness, they're living symbols, breathing narratives that have survived centuries of upheaval. Each flicker carries stories, each shadow holds meaning. Tonight, we discover how symbols transform from simple objects into vessels of cultural memory, how tradition becomes the bridge between past and present, connecting us to something larger than ourselves. The menorah stands before us, not merely a candelabra, but a messenger across millennia. Its branches reach upward like ancient arms, grasping for divine light in darkness. Each night, one more flame joins the chorus, building hope incrementally, methodically. This ritual of gradual illumination speaks to something deep within human nature, our need to push back against overwhelming darkness, not with grand gestures, but with small, persistent acts of faith, one flame at a time. But symbols are never static. They breathe and evolve with each generation. The oil that burned for 8 days, that miraculous fuel, becomes more than historical fact. It transforms into metaphor, representing resilience when resources seem exhausted, hope when circumstances appear hopeless. This ancient miracle speaks to modern struggles, reminding us that sometimes what looks like the end is actually the beginning of something unexpectedly beautiful, something sustaining, something necessary for survival. Consider the dreidel spinning quietly in children's hands. This simple wooden top carries within its 4 sides the weight of cultural preservation. Each Hebrew letter, Nun Gimel, Hey, Shin, whispers the ancient phrase, A great miracle happened there or here, depending on where you stand. The spinning motion itself becomes prayer, meditation, a physical manifestation of hope, rotating endlessly, defying gravity, defying despair, defying those who would silence these traditions. The foods we consume during these 8 nights, they too carry symbolic weight. Latchkas, crispy and golden, made from simple potatoes, represent the transformation of humble ingredients into something special. Through heat, through oil, through patient tending, safganiot, those pillowy donuts, remind us that sweetness can emerge from darkness, that joy has its place even in remembrance of struggle. Each bite connects us to countless generations who prepared these same foods in different kitchens under different skies. Yet symbols can become dangerous when they calcify, when they lose their flexibility, their ability to speak to new circumstances. The Maccabees understood this, perhaps too well. They wielded symbols as weapons, traditions as boundaries, defining who belonged and who didn't. The menorah became not just a beacon of hope, but a marker of orthodoxy. The oil became not just miracle, but mandate. This is where symbols reveal their double-edged nature, their power to unite or divide. In ancient Judea, tradition itself became a battlefield. Those who embraced Greek customs, who participated in gymnasium culture, who adopted Hellenistic practices, found themselves cast as traitors to symbolic purity. Their children, born into blended worlds, suddenly faced impossible choices: embrace the symbols of their ancestors or accept the symbols of their contemporaries, but never both. The weight of this decision, this forced choosing, echoes through generations, whispering questions about belonging, about identity. The temple itself, that sacred space, functioned as the ultimate symbol, its very stones carrying the dreams of a people. When Greek practices entered its courtyards, when foreign rituals touched its altar, the violation wasn't just physical, it was symbolic, existential, the cleansing, the rededication. These weren't just acts of purification, they were attempts to restore meaning itself, to reclaim the right to define what sacred looked like, what belonging meant, what home felt like. But here's where the story grows complex, delicately nuanced. The Maccabees' victory wasn't just about religious freedom, it was about the power to control symbols, to determine their meaning, to decide who could claim them. Those Hellenized Jews, with their Greek names and cosmopolitan ways, they too had symbols, they too had traditions, they too had legitimate claims to belonging. Yet their symbols were erased, their traditions deemed invalid, their belonging questioned, then denied, then punished. This erasure, this selective remembering, shapes every candle we light today. Every ritual carries within it the ghost of alternative practices, the shadow of different interpretations. The miracle of oil, beautiful as it sounds, also represents the triumph of one way of being Jewish over countless other ways. The celebration we inherit, warm and meaningful as it feels, rests upon the silenced voices of those who chose different paths, different symbols, different meanings. Cultural memory works like this, selectively, protectively. It preserves what serves the present, while quietly burying what complicates the narrative. The rabbis who recorded these stories, centuries after the events, they understood this power. They chose which details to emphasize, which voices to center, which symbols to preserve. Their choices weren't neutral. They were shaped by the needs of their own communities, their own struggles, their own hopes for survival. And so we arrive at a profound truth about tradition itself. It's never as ancient, never as unchanging, As it appears, each generation reshapes inherited symbols, breathes new meaning into old forms, adds layers, subtracts inconvenient details. This isn't deception, it's survival, it's adaptation, it's the way cultures remain alive rather than becoming museums. The symbols we cherish, they're not fossil records, they're living documents, constantly being rewritten, constantly being reborn. Consider how modern Hanukkah has evolved, how contemporary meanings have been grafted onto ancient roots. The Festival of Lights, once primarily about religious victory, now celebrates broader themes: resistance against oppression, the importance of cultural identity, the value of standing up for beliefs. These expansions aren't distortions, they're natural evolution, symbols growing to meet new needs, new circumstances, new communities seeking connection to something larger than themselves. The candles we light tonight, they carry all of this history, all of this complexity, all of this beautiful, messy humanity. Each flame illuminates not just darkness, but the intricate web of choices, conflicts, compromises that brought us to this moment, the tradition we practice. It's built upon layers, archaeological strata of meaning, each generation leaving its mark, adding its interpretation, its needs, its dreams, its understanding of what sacred means. And perhaps this is the real miracle, not the oil that lasted 8 nights, but the human capacity to find meaning in symbols, to create connection through ritual, to build bridges across time through shared practices, even when those practices carry within them the scars of old conflicts, the weight of difficult choices, the complexity of competing truths. The light we kindle, it's not pure, it's not simple, but it's ours, and it's real, and it's enough. As this chapter closes, as these flames continue their gentle dance, we prepare to explore how these ancient symbols, these inherited traditions, manifest in our contemporary celebrations. How do modern families navigate this legacy? How do contemporary communities make sense of these layered meanings? How does Hanukkah speak to our current moment, our current needs, our current understanding of what it means to be human, to belong, to hope? The answers await, just ahead. Chapter 10, The Evolution of Celebration. Hanukkah Today. Tonight we journey through time's gentle transformation, from ancient battlefields to modern living rooms, where the flickering of candles carries whispers of the past into warm family gatherings. The harsh realities we've explored, the civil wars, the bloodshed, they fade into background shadows as we discover how this fractured beginning birthed something beautiful, something that survived, adapted, and blossomed into cherished tradition. In homes across the world tonight, children gather around menorahs with wide eyes full of wonder, their small hands reaching toward dancing flames that carry no memory of ancient violence. These little ones know nothing of the Maccabean civil war, the families torn apart by religious extremism. To them, Hanukkah means presents wrapped in silver paper, potato latkes sizzling in grandmother's kitchen, and the magical moment when darkness yields to light. Modern families have transformed this festival of rebellion into something tender, something healing. Where once brother fought against brother in village squares, now brothers and sisters play dreidel games on living room carpets. The oil that once ran red with blood now fills kitchens with the golden aroma of frying delicacies. Time has softened the sharp edges, turning trauma into celebration, conflict into community. Picture suburban dining rooms on December evenings, where extended families gather around tables laden with traditional foods. Grandparents share gentle stories of miracles, and light, their voices carrying only the sweetest parts of history. The brutal truths we've uncovered remain buried, replaced by tales of triumph over oppression, of faithful few defeating mighty empires, of oil burning longer than possible. In synagogues worldwide, congregations sing ancient prayers that once marked battlefield victories, but now their voices rise in gratitude for freedom of worship, for the right to be different, for communities that embrace rather than exile. The Hanukkah service has become a celebration of religious liberty, a moment when diversity is cherished rather than feared, when assimilation and tradition find peaceful coexistence. Children's Hanukkah pageants in community centers, where young actors dress as Maccabee heroes, their cardboard swords and paper shields bearing no weight of real violence. These innocent performances strip away the complexity, presenting clear heroes and villains, good triumphing over evil. The messy reality of civil war becomes simple morality play, digestible for young minds, sanitized for modern sensibilities. Gift exchanges have transformed this winter festival, borrowing from surrounding Christmas traditions while maintaining Jewish identity. 8 nights of presents, each flame kindled with anticipation, each evening bringing new surprises. Commerce has embraced Hanukkah, store displays featuring blue and silver decorations, retailers recognizing the purchasing power of celebration, ancient rebellion now driving modern economy in ways the Maccabees never imagined. Yet beneath these cheerful transformations, something profound has occurred. A festival born from the darkest chapters of internal conflict has become a beacon of hope, a reminder that broken communities can heal, that traditions can evolve without losing their essence. The Hanukkah miracle isn't just about oil lasting 8 days, it's about hatred transforming into love, division becoming unity. Modern Jewish families navigate identity with gentleness their ancestors couldn't afford. Today's children learn Hebrew in after-school programs while playing soccer with diverse teammates, attend synagogue on Friday nights, then sleep over at Christian friends' homes. The rigid boundaries that once meant life or death have softened into personal choices, cultural exploration rather than existential warfare, accommodation instead of annihilation. In interfaith households, Hanukkah candles glow alongside Christmas trees, creating beautiful hybrid celebrations that would have horrified ancient fundamentalists. These families represent the very assimilation the Maccabees fought against, yet they've found ways to honor both traditions, to raise children proud of multiple heritages, to prove that religious identity need not require religious isolation or supremacy. The storytelling itself has evolved. Rabbis now acknowledge the uncomfortable complexities we've explored tonight, recognizing that faith communities grow stronger when they face their difficult histories honestly. Modern Hanukkah sermons sometimes mention the Civil War, the moral ambiguity, the cost of religious extremism. Truth-telling has replaced myth-making, at least in some progressive communities, seeking authentic rather than sanitized heritage. Community Hanukkah festivals fill public squares with music, food, and celebration, transforming what was once an insular religious observance into shared cultural experience. Non-Jewish neighbors join the festivities, learning about Jewish traditions, building bridges across faith communities. The exclusivity that marked ancient religious practice has given way to inclusive celebration, invitation rather than isolation, welcome rather than warfare. Social media amplifies modern Hanukkah celebrations, families sharing photos of their menorahs, recipes for traditional foods, memories of celebrations past. Digital connections span continents, linking Jewish communities worldwide, in simultaneous celebration. The technology the ancients couldn't imagine now preserves and shares traditions, creating global solidarity from local observances, virtual community from individual family moments. Perhaps most remarkably, Hanukkah has become a celebration of resilience itself, a recognition that communities can survive their worst impulses, that traditions born in trauma can become sources of joy. Families lighting candles tonight participate in an act of collective healing, each flame a small victory over the darkness of their ancestors' conflicts, each prayer a bridge across centuries of pain. The children gathered around tonight's menorahs, their faces glowing in candlelight, represent the ultimate triumph. They are the descendants of both sides of that ancient civil war, Maccabees and Hellenists, fundamentalists and assimilationists, their very existence proof that the wounds have healed, that love conquered hatred, that the future chose reconciliation over the perpetuation of ancient grudges and generational trauma. As we conclude our journey through Hanukkah's brutal and beautiful history, we see how time transforms everything, how the darkest chapters can birth the brightest celebrations, how communities can choose healing over hatred, growth over grievance. Tonight's candles flicker with all of history's complexity, yet their light points forward toward hope, toward tomorrow, toward the endless human capacity to create beauty from brokenness. Chapter 11, Interwoven Tapestry, Hanukkah, History, and Cultural Identity. Tonight, we settle into the most intimate corner of our journey, where flickering candlelight illuminates not just menorahs, but the complex threads woven through our understanding of tradition. Here, in this gentle space between sleep and story, we explore how the festivals we cherish carry within them layers of meaning, some celebrated, some whispered, some carefully tucked away in history's quieter corners. Cultural identity flows like honey through generations, sweet, golden, but sometimes clouding the vessel that contains it. Our Hanukkah celebrations today sparkle with joy and light, yet beneath this luminous surface lie deeper currents of human experience. The same hands that kindle sacred flames once wrestled with impossible choices between old ways and new worlds, between survival and principle, between the comfort of belonging and the courage of questioning. Imagine walking through ancient Jerusalem's narrow streets, where the aroma of olive oil mingles with heated discussions in shadowy doorways. Here, neighbors who once shared bread now debate the very essence of their identity. Some families embrace Greek philosophy, gymnasiums, and new ways of thinking, while others cling fiercely to ancestral traditions, viewing change as betrayal. The city breathes with tension, a community pulling itself apart, thread by precious thread. The tapestry of tradition reveals itself slowly in candlelight. Each thread represents choices made by ordinary people facing extraordinary times. A father teaching his son Greek alongside Hebrew, a mother hiding family treasures while embracing new customs. These weren't abstract philosophical debates, but kitchen table conversations that determined the fate of generations. Every family became a battleground between preservation and progress, between fear of loss and hope for growth. In the soft glow of evening lamps, we can almost see them, the Hellenized Jews who built gymnasiums and studied philosophy, believing they could bridge two worlds without losing their souls. They weren't betrayers of faith, but navigators of change, seeking to honor their heritage while embracing the broader world around them. Their children played Greek games while still observing Sabbath, their hearts carrying both Homer and Hebrew prayers in equal measure. Yet, across town, in dimly lit study halls, other voices whispered different truths. Traditional families gathered around scrolls, their fingers tracing ancient letters, their hearts heavy with concern for their disappearing world. They watched their neighbors abandon circumcision, eat forbidden foods, and embrace foreign gods, and felt the very foundations of their identity crumbling like old parchment. Their love for tradition burned as fiercely as any temple flame, protective, consuming, unwavering. The Maccabees emerged from this cultural crossroads, not as simple heroes fighting foreign oppression, but as complex figures wrestling with the soul of their community. Their hammers fell not only upon Greek soldiers, but upon Jewish neighbors who had chosen different paths. In village squares where children once played together, brothers now stood on opposite sides, their shared bloodline no match for their divided beliefs about what it meant to be Jewish. Picture the anguish in a mother's eyes as she watches her sons choose different sides of this cultural war. One joins the Maccabean revolt, passionate about preserving ancient ways. The other continues attending the gymnasium, believing in building bridges between cultures. Both love their heritage, both fear for their people's future, yet their paths lead them to opposite sides of history's divide. Such was the brutal complexity hidden beneath Hanukkah's luminous celebration. The temple courtyards, now remembered for their rededication, once echoed with the clang of civil war, Jewish swords meeting Jewish shields in desperate combat. These weren't distant enemies, but neighbors, cousins, childhood friends. Their faces familiar, their arguments intimate, their pain profound. The oil that miraculously burned for 8 days was consecrated not just by divine intervention, but by the tears of families torn apart, by religious fervor and cultural transformation. Ancient rabbis, wise in their understanding of human nature, chose carefully which parts of this story to emphasize. They lifted up the miracle of oil, the triumph over oppression, the rededication of the sacred, while gently allowing other chapters to fade into shadow, not from deception, but from compassion, understanding that communities need heroes and hope more than they need complete, unvarnished truth. Sometimes love manifests in the stories we choose not to tell. Yet in quiet moments like this, when sleep beckons and defenses soften, we can hold space for the fuller picture. The Hellenized Jewish families who died defending their vision of cultural integration, their dreams buried beneath the weight of history written by victors, their children who might have become great philosophers, teachers, or bridges between worlds, their potential erased, their memory consciously forgotten, their humanity sacrificed to create cleaner narratives for future generations. This doesn't diminish Hanukkah's beauty, but deepens it. Understanding that our ancestors faced impossible choices, made painful sacrifices, and carried complex burdens helps us appreciate the weight of tradition they passed down to us. The candles we light tonight burn not just for miraculous oil, but for every Jewish family that wrestled with questions of identity, belonging, survival, and growth. Their struggles illuminate our own journey through cultural complexity. Perhaps wisdom lies not in choosing sides across history's divide, but in honoring the humanity of all who faced these choices. The traditional families who fought to preserve sacred practices, the progressive families who sought to build bridges with their neighbors, the Maccabees who died for their convictions, the Hellenized Jews who died for theirs. All carried the same desire to ensure their people's survival. Though their methods differed dramatically, all deserve remembrance. As we prepare for sleep tonight, we can feel grateful for the complexity of our inheritance. The festivals we celebrate, the traditions we cherish, The stories we tell all emerge from this intricate tapestry of human experience. Every thread matters, every choice echoes through generations, every family's struggle contributes to the rich weaving that wraps around us today like a warm blanket, protecting us while connecting us to something infinitely larger than ourselves. The menorah's flames dance gently, now casting shadows that remind us how light and darkness interweave in all human stories. Our cultural identity isn't diminished by acknowledging its complexities, but enriched by embracing the full spectrum of experiences that brought us here. Tonight, we can honor both the victories celebrated and the losses mourned, both the heroes remembered and the voices forgotten, both the light that endured and the tears that blessed it. Let this understanding settle into your heart like warm honey, sweet with compassion for all who came before, complex with appreciation for the choices that shaped us, golden with the wisdom that emerges when we hold space for difficult truths. Tomorrow's celebrations can carry deeper meaning, tonight's rest can embrace fuller peace, and our dreams can weave together all the threads of this beautiful, complicated, sacred tapestry we call home. Chapter 12: Honoring the Forgotten, a Perspective from the Past. Tonight we turn our attention to those whose voices were silenced, whose stories were buried beneath the weight of victory narratives. In the quiet darkness of your room, let us create a sacred space for remembrance. These forgotten souls deserve our gentle acknowledgement, our respectful contemplation. Their choices, their suffering, their humanity, all deserve to be honored in the stillness of this moment, as we breathe together in quiet reflection. Imagine the weight of choosing between tradition and progress, between the familiar comfort of ancient ways and the alluring promise of new cultures. These were not simple decisions made in moments of weakness, but complex choices made by thoughtful people, navigating impossible circumstances. Families gathered around their tables, debating, discussing, sometimes arguing about which path would preserve their children's futures. Each choice carried profound consequences they could never have fully imagined, consequences that would echo through generations. In the gentle flicker of candlelight, we can almost see their faces. Mothers who worried about their sons' opportunities, fathers who saw promise in Greek education, young people who felt caught between two worlds. They were not traitors or enemies, but human beings making difficult choices in turbulent times. Their hearts beat with the same hopes and fears that fill human hearts today, their dreams as valid and precious as any others in history's long tapestry. Let the soft darkness around you hold space for their memory, for the children who learned Greek poetry alongside Hebrew prayers, for the craftsmen who worked in cosmopolitan markets while keeping Sabbath in their hearts. They built bridges between cultures, sought harmony where others saw only conflict. Their vision of a world where different traditions could coexist was perhaps ahead of its time, but their hope was genuine, their intentions born of love for their families and communities. The tragedy lies not in their choices, but in the violence that followed. Brother turned against brother, neighbor against neighbor, as the community fractured along lines of religious interpretation. The gymnasium became a symbol of division rather than opportunity, circumcision, a badge of loyalty rather than faith. What began as cultural dialogue transformed into deadly conflict, and those who had sought middle ground found themselves caught in an impossible position between two extremes. Feel the weight of their isolation in this quiet moment, the loneliness of being misunderstood by both sides of a conflict. They were too traditional for the Greeks, too progressive for the fundamentalists, too nuanced for a world demanding simple answers. Their complexity made them vulnerable. Their thoughtfulness became their weakness in a time that rewarded certainty over contemplation. Yet their humanity shines through the darkness of history, reminding us that truth rarely wears simple clothes. In the stillness of your breathing, honor their suffering with compassionate acknowledgement. They faced persecution not from foreign invaders, but from their own brothers, their own neighbors, their own community leaders. The pain of betrayal, the confusion of condemnation, the terror of being hunted by those who once shared their prayers, their festivals, their sacred stories. This internal conflict left scars deeper than any external war, wounds that time could never fully heal for those who survived. Let your heart hold gentle space for the families torn apart by ideology, for children who watched their parents become enemies, for elders who saw their communities dissolve in hatred and fear. The Hanukkah story we celebrate today emerged from this crucible of division, but in our celebration, we have sometimes forgotten to mourn what was lost. These forgotten souls remind us that victory often comes at a price, that triumph can carry the weight of tragedy within its golden light. Their voices whisper through the centuries, not in anger or bitterness, but in gentle reminder that history is complex, that righteousness can sometimes wear the mask of cruelty, that good people can find themselves on opposite sides of conflicts they never wanted. As you rest in this peaceful darkness, let their stories soften any tendencies toward judgment in your own heart, any impulses to see the world in simple terms of good and evil, right and wrong. The forgotten teach us about courage of a different kind, not the courage of warriors charging into battle, but the courage of those who dare to live in the uncomfortable space between certainties. They chose integration over isolation, dialogue over dogma, possibility over purity. Their courage was quieter, less dramatic, but no less real than the courage celebrated in traditional tellings of the Hanukkah story. Their bravery lay in their willingness to embrace complexity in a world demanding simplicity. Feel the gentle peace of this moment, holding their memory, protecting their dignity, honoring their humanity across the vast span of centuries. They were parents and children, artists and merchants, dreamers and pragmatists, each with hopes for the future, each with fears about the present, each with a story that deserved to be heard. Their elimination from the narrative was not their choice, but our remembrance of them tonight is ours, our gift to their silenced voices. In this sacred space of remembrance, we acknowledge that the light of Hanukkah carries shadows, that the oil that burned for 8 days illuminated not just victory, but also loss, not just triumph, but also tragedy. The miracle we celebrate emerged from human suffering, human conflict, human choices, both noble and terrible. Understanding this complexity does not diminish the light, but rather helps us see it more clearly, more compassionately, more truthfully. Their legacy lives in every moment when we choose understanding over judgment, compassion over condemnation, mercy over righteousness. They remind us that communities are strongest when they can hold differences with grace, when they can navigate change without violence, when they can honor tradition while embracing growth. Their tragedy becomes our teacher, their suffering our guide toward more thoughtful ways of being in community with those who see the world differently than we do. Let the gentle rhythm of your breath carry their spirits toward peace, toward the understanding they sought in life, toward the acceptance they were denied by their contemporaries. In death, they have found what they could not find in life, a place where their complexity is welcomed, where their choices are understood, where their humanity is celebrated rather than condemned. They rest now beyond the reach of human judgment, held in the eternal embrace of divine compassion. As we prepare to conclude our journey through the hidden layers of Hanukkah, their voices join the chorus of history, adding depth and nuance to stories too often told in simple terms. They teach us that every victory contains seeds of loss, every triumph bears the weight of tragedy, every celebration carries the responsibility of remembrance. Their gift to us is the reminder that truth is rarely simple, that wisdom lies in holding multiple perspectives simultaneously, in embracing paradox with grace. In the quiet sanctuary of this ending moment, we honor their memory not with grand gestures, but with gentle acknowledgement, with patient listening, with open hearts willing to hear uncomfortable truths. They have waited centuries for this recognition, this moment of respectful remembrance, this space where their humanity is acknowledged without condition. May their spirits find rest in our recognition. May their stories find peace in our telling. May their memory find home in our grateful hearts. Chapter 13, Teachings of Time, the Lesson of Hanukkah. As our journey through this ancient tale draws near its end, we pause to gather the lessons scattered like olive oil across the pages of history. What wisdom emerges from these shadows of civil war and religious strife? What truths can we carry forward from this complex tapestry of faith and conflict? Let us reflect together on what Hanukkah truly teaches us about the human condition. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies not in the victory itself, but in understanding how memory shapes meaning. The rabbis who crafted the miracle story centuries later weren't trying to deceive, they were trying to heal. They transformed a tale of brutal division into one of divine light, choosing hope over historical accuracy. Sometimes, the stories we tell ourselves matter more than the events that inspired them. Consider how both sides believed they were fighting for their people's survival. The Hellenized Jews saw Greek culture as progress, a path to prosperity and acceptance in the wider world. The traditionalists saw it as spiritual death, the slow dissolution of everything sacred. Neither side was entirely wrong, yet both paid a terrible price for their certainty. Conviction without compassion becomes destruction. This ancient conflict mirrors struggles we witness today, communities torn between tradition and change, families divided by different visions of identity and belonging. The Maccabean revolt reminds us that the most painful battles are often fought not against strangers, but against those who share our blood and history. The enemy is rarely as foreign as we imagine. Yet, from this darkness, light did emerge. Not the supernatural flame of legend, but something more precious. The Jewish people learned to hold multiple truths simultaneously, to be both particular and universal, rooted and adaptive. They discovered that survival doesn't require purity, but rather the wisdom to change while preserving what matters most. Flexibility became their greatest strength. The oil that burned for 8 days becomes a metaphor for resilience itself. Not the oil of the temple lamps, but the fuel of human endurance. How do communities survive catastrophic division? How do families rebuild after civil war? Slowly, carefully, with forgiveness, as rare and precious as the purest olive oil. Healing takes time, much longer than 8 days. The Maccabees teach us about the seductive power of righteousness. They began as freedom fighters, defending their faith against oppression, but righteousness can become its own form of tyranny. Victory can corrupt the victor. The same hands that cleansed the temple also shed the blood of fellow Jews. Even the noblest causes can lead to terrible consequences when zealotry replaces compassion. Perhaps this is why the rabbis chose to emphasize the miracle over the military victory. They understood that celebrating conquest, even righteous conquest, can perpetuate cycles of violence. The story of divine oil burning beyond nature's limits offers a different kind of triumph. It suggests that the greatest victories are spiritual, not military. Light over darkness, hope over despair. The Hellenized Jews who were defeated, their voices were largely silenced by history. Yet they too were seeking something valuable, connection to the broader world, knowledge and culture beyond their ancestral borders. Their tragedy reminds us that progress and tradition need not be enemies, and the challenge is integration, not elimination. Wisdom lies in synthesis, not suppression. Modern Hanukkah celebrations often focus on the joy of the festival, the games and gifts and family gatherings. This isn't wrong, it's necessary. Communities need celebrations that bring people together, not stories that divide them. The transformed Hanukkah narrative serves love better than historical accuracy. Sometimes, the most important truth is not what happened, but what we need to happen. The real miracle of Hanukkah might be this transformation itself, how a story of civil war became a celebration of light, how a tale of division became a call for dedication. The rabbis who reshaped this narrative understood something profound about human nature. We need stories that inspire us to be better, not reminders of how terrible we can be. Yet remembering the complexity honors all who suffered, the traditionalists who died defending their beliefs, the Hellenized Jews who were executed for their choices, the families torn apart by ideology, the children who grew up in a world split by religious war. Their pain was real, even if their stories were later simplified. Truth includes the uncomfortable parts. What can we learn from this ancient struggle between tradition and change? Perhaps that both impulses are necessary, but neither should dominate completely. Cultures need roots to give them strength and wings to help them soar. The tension between preservation and adaptation isn't a problem to solve, but a dynamic to manage with wisdom and patience. The menorah that burns tonight in Jewish homes worldwide carries within its flames both stories, the military victory and the spiritual miracle, the historical complexity and the inspiring legend. Each candle represents not just a day of oil, but a day of choosing hope over despair, light over darkness, healing over harm. The flame becomes a commitment to better choices. As we contemplate these lessons, we can appreciate how the past informs the present without imprisoning it. The Maccabean revolt shows us the dangers of extremism, while the Hanukkah miracle offers the possibility of transformation. History teaches, but it doesn't dictate. Each generation can choose which stories to emphasize, which values to honor, which future to create. So as the Hanukkah lights flicker in the darkness, they illuminate more than ancient memories. They light the path forward, reminding us that even from the ashes of division, communities can rebuild with greater wisdom. The oil burns on not just for 8 days, but for all the days we choose compassion over conquest, understanding over judgment, peace over the satisfaction of being right. Chapter 14, The Soft Glow. Hanukkah's message for today. In this gentle candlelight, we find ourselves at the end of our journey, yet perhaps at a new beginning. The flames before us flicker with the same warmth that danced in ancient windows, the same hope that burned in darkened temples. Tonight, we explore how these distant echoes can guide us through our modern world, how ancient wisdom speaks to contemporary hearts with surprising clarity and enduring truth. The candles of Hanukkah have always been more than mere light. They are windows into understanding. Each flame carries stories of people who faced impossible choices, who wrestled with questions of identity and belonging that feel remarkably familiar today. In our interconnected world, we too navigate the delicate balance between tradition and change, between holding fast to our roots and embracing the unknown paths that stretch before us. Consider how the Maccabees faced a world where cultures blended and clashed, where neighbors held different beliefs, where families disagreed about the best path forward. Their struggles mirror our own modern tensions, the way we grapple with diversity in our communities, the challenge of maintaining our identity while remaining open to others. The soft glow of their candles reminds us that understanding requires patience and wisdom grows slowly. In their time, as in ours, fear often drove people apart. Suspicion built walls where bridges might have stood. Yet Hanukkah's enduring message whispers of another way, a path illuminated by compassion rather than conquest. The festival's true miracle isn't just about oil lasting 8 nights. It's about hope persisting through the darkest moments, about small acts of faith creating ripples that extend far beyond their original boundaries. Today, we live in our own complex cultural landscape, where different traditions intersect and sometimes clash. The lessons from ancient Judea speak directly to our modern challenges, reminding us that understanding doesn't require agreement, that respect can flourish even amid deep differences. The Hanukkah candles teach us that even the smallest flame can push back darkness, that individual acts of kindness can illuminate entire communities. When we light candles today, we're not just remembering an ancient victory, we're choosing to create light in our present moment. Each flame becomes a commitment to compassion, a promise to approach our neighbors with curiosity rather than judgment. The ritual reminds us that building understanding requires daily practice, small, consistent acts of reaching across the spaces that divide us, gentle persistence in the face of misunderstanding. The Maccabees learned, as we must learn, that true strength lies not in overwhelming others, but in maintaining our values while remaining open to dialogue. Their story teaches us that preserving what we hold dear doesn't require destroying what others treasure. In our modern world, this wisdom translates into countless small encounters, opportunities to choose understanding over assumption, to extend grace rather than judgment to those who see the world differently. The soft glow of Hanukkah candles creates a sacred space, a gentle boundary between the harsh realities outside and the warmth within. This light doesn't blind us to the world's complexities. Instead, it helps us see more clearly, with eyes trained by compassion rather than fear. It reminds us that every person we encounter carries their own struggles, their own hopes, their own flickering flame, seeking recognition and respect. In our interconnected age, the Hanukkah story offers profound guidance. It shows us how to honor our roots while engaging meaningfully with others. The festival's evolution over centuries demonstrates that traditions can adapt without losing their essence, that openness to new understanding can actually deepen our appreciation for ancient wisdom. Each candle we light becomes a prayer for greater compassion, a commitment to building bridges rather than walls. The miracle of the oil reminds us that resources we thought were depleted can sustain us far longer than expected, that hope can burn brightly even when circumstances seem impossible. In our modern context, this translates to faith in human goodness, belief that understanding can emerge from conflict, trust that patient dialogue can transform even the most entrenched divisions. The candles whisper that transformation takes time, but it is possible. As we watch these flames dance, we're reminded that light doesn't argue with darkness, it simply shines. This gentle truth offers a model for our interactions with others, suggesting that the most powerful response to hostility might be persistent kindness, that the strongest argument for our values might be living them with integrity and grace. The Hanukkah candles teach us that influence flows from authenticity, not from force. The story of Hanukkah continues to evolve, as all living traditions must. Each generation discovers new meanings in ancient symbols, finds fresh relevance in old stories. Today's candles carry not just the light of ancient temples, but our contemporary hopes for peace, our modern prayers for understanding, our present commitment to creating communities where diversity is celebrated rather than feared. The flame connects past and future through the eternal now. In this gentle illumination, we see that Hanukkah's true victory wasn't military, it was spiritual. The Maccabees won something more precious than territory. They preserved the right to be different, the freedom to maintain their identity while participating in a larger world. This lesson resonates powerfully today, reminding us that our goal shouldn't be conformity, but rather the creation of spaces where authentic diversity can flourish in mutual respect. The soft glow before us illuminates not just this moment, but the path ahead. It reminds us that every act of compassion, every choice to listen rather than judge, every effort to understand rather than condemn, adds light to our world. The Hanukkah candles don't promise that change will be easy, but they assure us that it's possible, that small lights can eventually transform entire landscapes of understanding. As this festival continues its ancient dance through time, it carries our hopes forward into an uncertain future. The candles remind us that tradition and progress need not be enemies, that preserving what we value and embracing positive change can happen simultaneously. In the gentle flicker of these flames, we find permission to be both rooted and reaching, to honor our past while working toward a more compassionate tomorrow. Let the soft glow of understanding settle over you now, like candlelight warming a quiet room. The lessons of Hanukkah don't end with the extinguishing of flames. They begin there, carrying forward into countless moments where we choose compassion over conflict, understanding over assumption, hope over fear. Rest now in this gentle light, knowing that tomorrow offers fresh opportunities to kindle understanding, to be the light we wish to see in the world. Chapter 15, A Light in the Darkness, Closing Reflections. The night has grown deep around us, and here in the quiet darkness, 8 small flames flicker against the window pane. These Hanukkah lights seem so gentle now, so peaceful, casting their warm glow across the room. But we know their story. We've walked through the shadows of their past together, witnessed the complexity hidden beneath their simple beauty. Tonight, we reflect. Our journey has taken us from ancient battlefields to modern living rooms, from the clash of swords in Jerusalem's courtyards to the gentle lighting of candles in contemporary homes. We've seen how a brutal civil war, brother fighting brother, became transformed over centuries into a festival of lights and joy. The same flames that once illuminated scenes of violence now bring families together in warmth and celebration. This transformation reminds us that traditions are living things, breathing, evolving, shaped by the hands of time and the needs of those who carry them forward. The rabbis of old understood this. They softened the harsh edges of history, emphasized miracle over massacre, hope over horror. They knew that survival sometimes requires reimagining the past to serve the present, The Maccabean revolt we explored was messy, complicated, filled with moral ambiguity that defies simple heroes and villains. Judah Maccabee and his brothers fought not just against Greek oppression, but against their own people who had embraced Hellenistic culture. Villages were torn apart, families divided, blood spilled in the name of religious purity. These are uncomfortable truths that challenge our neat holiday narratives. Yet perhaps there's wisdom in how these stories evolved, how the sharp edges of historical reality were smoothed by generations of storytellers. They understood that some truths serve better as gentle lights than harsh spotlights. The miracle of oil, burning for 8 days when there was only enough for one, became the story that mattered more than battlefield casualties. In our modern celebration of Hanukkah, children spin dreidels and receive gifts. Families gather around tables laden with latkes and sufganiot. The air fills with laughter and warmth. The ancient civil war has been transformed into something beautiful, something that brings joy rather than division. This is perhaps the greatest miracle of all, how humans can take even the darkest chapters and find light within them. Every tradition we celebrate carries similar layers. Christmas, Easter, Diwali, Eid, all have complex histories that interweave joy with struggle, triumph with tragedy. The festivals that survive and thrive are often those that have learned to emphasize connection over conflict and hope over historical accuracy. They become vessels for values rather than strict recordings of events, bridges between past and future. As we sit here in the gentle glow of these 8 flames, we might ask ourselves what stories we're creating for future generations. What narratives are we choosing to preserve, to emphasize, to pass down? What lights are we kindling in the darkness of our own complicated times? How will our descendants remember this moment, this era, these struggles we face today? The Hanukkah lights before us flicker softly, each flame a reminder that even in the deepest darkness there can be illumination. The Maccabees fought their battles in a world that seemed to be ending, their traditions under threat, their identity dissolving. Yet here we are, centuries later, still lighting these same flames, still telling their story, though transformed by time and wisdom. Perhaps this is what traditions truly offer us, not perfect historical records, but touchstones of meaning, moments to pause and reflect on who we are and where we've come from. The brutal truths of the past need not be forgotten, but they need not define us either. We can acknowledge the complexity while choosing to focus on the light rather than the darkness. In temples and homes around the world tonight, families are gathered around their own menorahs, sharing their own versions of this ancient story. Some know the historical complexities we've explored, others know only the tale of miraculous oil. Both versions have their place. Both serve their purpose in the grand tapestry of human meaning-making. Truth has many faces, and sometimes the kindest face is the most important. The 8 nights of Hanukkah stretch before us like a meditation on persistence, on the power of small lights to push back vast darkness. Each candle adds to the glow, just as each generation adds its voice to the ongoing story. We are part of this narrative now, we who have listened, who have learned, who carry these complex truths forward into an uncertain future. As our exploration comes to an end, we find ourselves changed by what we've discovered. The simple story of religious freedom has revealed itself as something far more nuanced, a tale of cultural conflict, of choices between assimilation and preservation, of the prices paid for both resistance and accommodation. These lessons echo through our own times, in our own struggles with identity and belonging. The darkness outside seems less absolute, now softened by the understanding that light and shadow are partners in the dance of existence. The Maccabees and the Hellenized Jews, the traditionalists and the modernizers, the victors and the defeated, all played their parts in this ancient drama. Their conflicts gave birth to questions we still grapple with today about faith, culture, and the cost of survival. Take a deep breath. Let the weight of these revelations settle gently in your mind. History is rarely simple, rarely comfortable, but it is always instructive. The stories we tell ourselves matter. They shape who we become. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, carry with you the image of these flickering flames, small lights burning steadily against the vast darkness, persistent, hopeful, eternal. And so our journey ends where it began, with light in the darkness. The Hanukkah candles burn lower now, their wax pooling, their flames growing smaller, but their message remains clear. Even in the most brutal times, even amid the most difficult truths, there is always the possibility of illumination, of understanding, of peace. Sleep well, dream gently, and may your own lights burn brightly against whatever darkness you may face.